What's up, everybody? This is Cecil Alexander. Welcome to my picking masterclass. In this class, we're going to be talking about my general approach to right-hand technique. We're going to be talking about things like rest strokes, getting your left hand to communicate with your right hand, developing speed, and playing fast while staying relaxed. Hope you enjoy. Here's part one. Welcome to part one of my picking masterclass. So in this part, we're going to be talking mostly about picking mechanics, right hand mechanics, picking hand mechanics, whatever you want to call it. So the main question that I get with regards to picking technique would be about my pick grip. So the standard pick grip would be between the pad of the thumb and the side of the index finger. So like this, right? That kind of thing. Sometimes people arch their thumb like this to get more of a pick angle. But the way that I hold the pick and the way that I learned to hold the pick from people like George Benson and Dan Wilson is between the pad of both those fingers. So between the pad of the index and the pad of the thumb. So it's more like this, you know, and everybody has their own slight variation on this. Dan Wilson kind of sticks his thumb out a little bit more like this, so does Bobby Broom. Benson tends to keep his thumb and index finger like parallel like this, right? But I just kind of experiment with what feels comfortable. But to be honest with you, the grip is going to be the least important part of gaining fluency and gaining speed with your right hand. The most important part with right hand technique, I'd say, is practicing rest strokes, right? So rest strokes are, I think, what changed the game for me with regards to picking hand technique. So this is what allowed me to, you know, stay relaxed while playing fast, stay accurate, most importantly, I think, and avoid any, you know, right hand injuries or anything like that, because I had a lot of issues with tendonitis, carpal tunnel, and all that kind of stuff for years. So basically, I use what are called downward rest strokes, right? And this means that I do rest strokes on downstrokes primarily. And this is what a lot of gypsy jazz guitar players do. This is what Benson does a lot, and Dan Wilson, as I mentioned before. And basically the idea is that when you have a downstroke, say on the low E string, the 6th string, the pick is going to rest on the A string, the 5th string, right? Like that, right? So in example one, you'll see a quick exercise for practicing that mechanic, just getting it to feel comfortable. I'm not too big on exercises, but in this beginning chapter of the masterclass, you're going to see a couple of those just to get an idea of how to, you know, just get this to feel natural, get it to feel like second nature. So in example two, you're going to see a quick exercise for getting this mechanic to work on each individual string, right? So we're going to go from the 6th string, the low 6th string, to the high E string, the 1st string. And once we get to the 1st string, the high E string, basically that motion of resting on the next lowest string is going to feel like so ingrained that it's going to feel like there's an imaginary string there, basically. And that's going to apply to, you know, all of the more musical examples that we do in the later parts of this masterclass, including, pentatonic lines, bebop lines, and even some of the more organic stuff that we'll talk about in later chapters. So once you get an idea of how to do rest strokes with downstrokes, then you want to get comfortable with adding the upstrokes in. So we're going to start approaching alternate picking. So in exercise 3, you're going to see a quick example of how to practice alternate picking with rest strokes on the downstrokes and what is called the upstroke escape, right? So this is kind of the terminology that Troy Grady uses in his Cracking the Code series on YouTube. I really recommend that you check that out because I got a lot of information out of that, and that kind of shaped a lot of the ways that I think about right hand technique, right? So basically the idea with alternate picking is I like to do downward rest strokes for the downstrokes, and then the upstrokes are going to escape. So my general picking motion for alternate picking is going to look like this. So you can see how there's kind of this scooping motion, right? And it almost, when you speed this up, it almost feels like the pick is bouncing off the next lowest string. I usually compare this to Mahler technique with drum set technique, how when drummers play really fast with one hand, for example, like if they play really fast on the ride cymbal, the drumstick is going to bounce off the ride cymbal, and they're going to accept the rebound from the ride cymbal and just kind of pick the stick up, right? So it almost feels like you're getting two strokes for the effort of one. And it kind of feels the same with picking technique, I think. And it really, alleviates a lot of the tension that you might feel if you're trying to get all of those individual strokes in and not rely on any kind of barrier to tell you like when to pull the pick back, if that makes sense. Another important aspect of the pick grip itself is going to be the angle of the pick. So instead of attacking the strings flat on, like this, or if you're using a more standard grip, it might look something like this, we're going to attack the strings with an angle. So I'm going to be angling the strings in my grip upwards, rather than flat on. And if you're using a more conventional grip, the angle might look like this, rather than this. And basically, picking with an angle is going to help a lot with accuracy. A lot of beginner to intermediate guitar players that don't play with an angle on the pick have issues with maybe the pick getting caught in the strings, and basically the angle is going to eradicate that issue. And it's going to make your picking more fluid. It's going to make the pick just kind of cut through the strings in a really smooth way. So now that we have the general alternate picking motion down pat, let's try applying some of this to the left hand as well. So a big part of right hand technique is actually getting your left hand to communicate with your right hand, right? So the way that you map all of your phrases or licks out on the fretboard has to support what your right hand is doing. So I think that a really easy way of seeing this with the way that I structure my picking technique is taking a look at the minor pentatonic scale, right? So just the first box of, say, the A minor pentatonic scale. So two things that I like to keep in mind when I'm, structuring phrases or when I'm trying to approach a new phrase and see how to map it out on the fretboard to accompany my right hand is I like to think of getting an even number of pick strokes per string, right? So 2s, 4s, 6s, and things like that. And also I like to think of starting each string with a downstroke and ending each string with an upstroke. So in some of the later chapters, we're going to talk a little bit more about bending some of these rules just to get more nuanced phrasing and to suit genres like bebop, bebop improvisation. But first, let's just get an idea of the fundamentals and how to apply that to the left hand. So as I mentioned, the easiest way to see this in practice is with the pentatonic scale. So in the next example, you'll see just the standard A minor pentatonic scale in box 1, and it'll be mapped out as 2 notes per string, right? Not just 2 notes per string, but 2 pick strokes per string. And we're going to start each of those strings with a downstroke, like I mentioned before, and end each string with an upstroke, right? And what this is going to do is just keep your right hand in one plane, right? So this is really important because a lot of times I think when people get caught up in practicing, say, alternate picking or practicing economy picking or sweep picking or something like that, their right hand is kind of moving in all of these funny ways that's kind of stopping them from playing this, whatever that figure may be, at a really fast tempo, right? So if your right hand is staying in one plane for the most part, anyways, we'll get into that a little bit later, this allows you to just, kind of focus on the music that your left hand is making, basically. So in example 1, as I mentioned, you'll see the A minor pentatonic scale, 2 notes per string. It'll sound like this. So as I mentioned before, you'll notice that my right hand is just staying kind of in one plane, like I like to describe, right? And it's not doing all of this, funny jumping around or anything like that. It's just kind of moving between the strings in a very uniform way, right? And this is going to help you with kind of breaking through speed thresholds, staying relaxed, and also just not thinking about your right hand very much. And like I said, focusing on your left hand, which is the most important thing, because that's where all those ideas come from. So as I mentioned before, there are some different ways of bending these more structured picking rules to suit more nuanced phrasing, just to get more musical or more organic phrases that don't sound so pattern-based, right? So we can get a glimpse of this within the pentatonic scale. So if you refer to the next example, we're going to see this idea that kind of moves through the second box of the A minor pentatonic scale. So I'm going to start up at this E, and then I'm going to pull off to D, right, from the pinky, and I'm starting on a downstroke, right? Pull off to D, and then do an upstroke on C, right? So I think that this specific motion with this odd grouping where you have the pull off in the middle rather than having the pull off at the end, I think that that kind of disguises the legato or disguises the pull off in a way. And it kind of makes it sound like you're picking all of those notes still. So after I do that pull off to D and then I do the upstroke on C, I just descend that second box of the A minor pentatonic scale using all alternate picking, right? So down, pull off, upstroke, and then down, up, and then just down, up, down, up, down, up for the rest of it, right? So since this is the first kind of musical phrase that we've been working on, I'd recommend trying to put this into application, right? So with every, musical idea, musical phrase, lick, or whatever, I'd recommend trying to put it into application so you can actually try to get it to come out in your playing, when you're playing with people, when you're improvising, that kind of thing. So, go on YouTube or whatever, turn on a blues backing track and try just plugging this lick in. Try to play it slow, try to play it fast, try to vary the rhythm of it, all that kind of stuff. But I would make sure that you're really adhering to those picking mechanics that I described. That's just going to get it to feel like second nature and just get it to kind of flow out of your fingers. All right, so in the next example, we're going to see this exercise that is basically descending groups of six through the minor pentatonic scale. So we're going to take a group of six starting on C, then a group of six starting on G, then D, then A. So this next exercise will sound like this up to speed. So this is kind of a lick that you might hear like Eric Johnson play or Joe Bonamassa or somebody like that. It's very pattern derived. It's really easy to get under the fingers, really easy to hear, most importantly. And it's also really easy to sync your hands up to play something like that really quickly. So basically, it's just all alternate picking, starting on a downstroke on C, upstroke, downstroke, upstroke, and then to the second string. All right. So most importantly, like I mentioned before, your right hand will be just in one plane, basically. You're not doing all of this fancy jumping or anything like that. And that in turn allows you to kind of turn your right hand brain off and just focus on the left hand. I'm going to keep coming back to that just because it's just so important. So in the next example, you'll see an idea that includes descending fives this time through the minor pentatonic scale. So this is an idea that players like Eric Johnson, Joe Bonamassa use a lot, as well as some more modern fusion players. Basically, we're going to be starting up at C on the first string, moving to A, and then down the scale to D, and then we're going to do G to E. And I'm going to grab that G after the D on the third string with a downstroke. So down, up, down, right? So that's basically the pattern that we're going to be moving through the minor pentatonic scale. So it'll sound like this slowly. And like this up to speed. So in the next example, we're going to see what I like to refer to as the kitchen sink. And this just means like everything that we've talked about so far kind of thrown into one lick, right? One lick that you can use and just get all of these mechanics into your playing. And basically it's going to take, odd number of groupings in your left hand, but still an even number of groupings in your right hand, using, pull-offs, hammer-ons to kind of compensate. It's going to take into account downward sweeps, right? Like we talked about in the previous example. You're also just going to have some kind of pattern-based playing that you can just kind of burn through with all alternate picking, right? So here's the next example. So the next couple of examples are going to look at bending these structured picking rules a little bit more. So the first one we're going to take a look at is what I like to call the scoop. So this is kind of a way of simulating an upward sweep kind of contour, but without changing your picking motion or doing any of this jumping kind of stuff. So basically, the idea is if you have, an area of legato on one string, right? So basically, you could think of this as just a time where your left hand is kind of doing the work and your right hand is just kind of chilling and waiting to get instructions from the left hand, right? So in this example, we'll have, starting on C in the A minor pentatonic scale, pulling off to A, and then your right hand is going to use that time to adjust and then hit E on the second string with an upstroke, right? And then from there, your right hand is basically set up to do whatever, right? So typically what I do is I take that pull off and then do a scoop upstroke to the second string, and then from there, I just go back into that kind of downward rest stroke territory. So this example will sound like this. So the scoop is really going to come in handy for the bebop examples that we're going to be taking a look at. Again, that's just going to be, a whole new world of nuanced phrasing and just nuanced things that you're going to have to do with your right hand to accompany what your left hand is doing. So the next example is going to take a look at another way of bending these rules a little bit. So this is going to get into a little bit of cross picking. So cross picking is a big technique in bluegrass and country guitar, and with the way that I pick and the music that I play, I really only do this in short bursts, right? And this and the scoop and a lot of other ways of bending these structured picking rules are only really sustainable in short bursts. It kind of has to be surrounded by all of this more uniform picking, or picking that's just kind of like I described in one plane. So maybe you'll be picking some phrase that's like really downward rest stroke centric, and then in the middle of that you'll have like a brief moment of cross picking, or a brief moment of a scoop kind of pick idea, or even like an upstroke sweep, which I would say is like really uncommon, but it can happen in short bursts. So here's the next example. So now we're going to get into applying some of these concepts to more nuanced phrasing, like what you'll see in bebop and jazz improvisation. So we're going to take basically a basic 2-5-1 idea in F, and I'm not going to explain really the harmonic or melodic concepts that are going on, really just the picking mechanics and picking motions. So here's the first example. So in this example, this will be the first idea where we have double downstrokes on one string, right? And this is going to be a really big thing later once we get into free stroke picking and just playing medium tempos within a bebop context or a swing context. And this is just something that really just helps you reset, kind of similar to the one of the previous examples where your left hand was kind of doing the work for a little bit, and your right hand kind of had time to think like what it was going to do next. That's kind of how the double downstroke is typically used in faster phrases. So in the first measure of this idea, we have this little slide up from A to C, and after I hit that C, I do another downstroke to an upstroke from A to B flat. Right. So you can see there how that idea is kind of allowing your right hand to have time to reset and just basically set up so that it can get to the next string change a little bit faster. After that idea on the first string, I go down to the third string, and that third string jump with the right hand is set up, right, already with that upstroke. So I hit D, C sharp, back to D, and that's all legato after the first pick stroke, after that first downstroke. And then I jump up to the first string, right? So we have another example of cross picking here, or just like one pick stroke per string, basically. And then after that, we basically set up for just straight, downward rest stroke picking for a little bit, just kind of comfortable stuff. After that kind of comfortable stretch for a little bit, we have another brief moment of cross picking. So we go, and really just from that B flat to C at the end, that's really the only moment where you have to cross pick again in this phrase, right? And again, this is something that you can, do in short bursts in the context of a primarily downward rest stroke oriented phrase, right? Just to kind of mix things up a little bit. So after we have that little brief moment of cross picking, we have more downward rest stroke oriented stuff. And then we use that last stroke on the fourth string to jump down to the sixth string. And then we have another kind of interesting moment of breaking the structured picking rules a little bit. So we have A, jump down to C. And then we have this is an idea that I use quite a bit. So we have C, and then that C is with the downstroke. Another downstroke to D, hammer on to E, and then an upstroke on G on the fourth string. Right, so that idea just feels great if you just do it really quickly. Not for a whole phrase. You don't want to be doing that kind of stuff. And then I go back down to the fifth string, down, up, and then just downward sweeps up to that E on the second string, and then an upstroke on F, right? So you can see how there's a lot of different techniques coming together to create this, more nuanced bebop phrase. So you really want to make sure that you have a firm grasp on those fundamentals that we described in the previous examples before you start to tackle this kind of stuff. So in this second bebop-oriented phrase, we still have, a wide variety of techniques happening. Again, kind of a kitchen sink example like I described before. We're going to have some cross-picking, some scoops happening, as well as some downward sweeps, and just some general, comfortable downward rest stroke picking ideas. So here's the next example. So I think that the first measure of this phrase is probably the most difficult, just because it has the most subtlety in phrasing with the right hand, basically. So we start with this diatonic approach to B flat, basically. And I'm picking that A as a downstroke, and then I'm picking the C and pulling off to B flat from there. Right? And then I jump down to C sharp, to D, and that D I hammer onto. So I do a downstroke on C sharp, and then I hammer onto D, and then I do an upstroke on F, and then a downstroke on A. Right? And this is kind of where there's a little bit of room for variation, I think. So this this little idea, this what looks like a D minor triad, with a chromatic approach, the C sharp, D, F, A. Depending on the tempo, I might, do a downstroke to an upstroke, and then just down, down. That's what I would do if it was maybe kind of up tempo. But if it was medium tempo, I might do that kind of alternate picking thing that I described. So hammer onto the D and then up, down instead. And we'll get into this a little bit later with the etude, the final etude for the masterclass. But basically, your right hand, depending on the tempo, is going to have to do some specific things to kind of make things swing a little bit more, to make things fit in the pocket. A lot of times this is going to include, cross picking. This is going to include double downstrokes, double upstrokes in some cases, and generally just things that would feel really awkward up tempo. But it's just going to make the music feel really good when you're playing medium swing or medium up, pretty much. So regardless of which of those two options I choose for that little D minor triad idea, I'm going to end on an upstroke on A flat, and then to a downstroke on E. And then I'm going to go up to G, right? So there's a little moment of cross picking there from A flat, E to G. So far we have this. So the good news is from the second measure to the end of this phrase, we basically have mostly just, downward rest stroke picking, which is going to feel really comfortable under the right hand, given that you have a firm grasp of those fundamentals that I described previously. So after I land on that G with an upstroke, I have this little chromatic approach to E, and that's just all alternate picking. So up, down, up. I land on that E on the second string with an upstroke, and then I go down, up, so that's on E flat to D, then a downstroke on D flat, upstroke on C, downstroke on D, and then I have a quick little downward sweep from D to E. So down, down, up on G, then I pull off to G flat. So downstroke on E, upstroke on F, and then this little chromatic approach from D sharp to E. So that's down, up, and then that allows me to cross back to the third string where I do C with a downstroke, D with an upstroke, G with a downstroke, and then E with an upstroke. So in this next phrase that's in the bebop style, we're going to see another example of some more nuanced pick mechanics, including some double downstrokes as well as downstroke sweeps moving through the strings in this direction. So the phrase is over 2, 5, 1 and F again. We start on E to G, and then do a little approach to F, and then we have this chromatic approach to A on the fourth string. So we go, right, and then we have that hammer on from G sharp to A, and then downstroke, downstroke. So we do this downstroke sweep from A, C, E, and then we do an upstroke on E flat, and then I do a downstroke on G, pull off to E flat, and then slide down to D. So far we have, right? So we end that string with a downstroke, the second string, and then we do another downstroke going into the third string. So this works well because we have time to adjust with our right hand with the left hand legato, basically. So, right? So we put our right hand in order to put a downstroke on the third string, on D flat, upstroke on C, and then B flat to A, downstroke, upstroke, downstroke on C, upstroke on B flat, and then downstroke on C sharp, upstroke on D, and then downward sweep. So F to A on the 4th and 3rd string. Upstroke on A flat. So then we just do alternate picking for the rest of the phrase. So after A, we go A flat with an upstroke, E, downstroke, E flat, upstroke, D flat, downstroke, B, upstroke, and then C, downstroke. And that's the end of the phrase. So in this next phrase, we'll see something that's a little bit unusual, and that's going to be a double upstroke. So we're going to start this phrase with a double downstroke, just kind of a sweep type idea. Up a G minor triad, G minor 7 if you include the F at the end. We end on that F with an upstroke. Do a little trill that's started with a downstroke on E, all right? And then we do an upstroke. We started with a downstroke on E, do an upstroke on E flat, and then another upstroke on D flat. And then that starts an upstroke sweep. Right? And then notice how I'm getting my right hand kind of back in place to get kind of back into that plane. So that's the unusual thing about this phrase, is that it's breaking out of that right hand plane that I described. But when you do that for, just kind of short bursts, it works musically, and it works for your right hand. It doesn't make things feel too awkward, right? So far we have, right, so down this little D flat minor 9 arpeggio, so, and then slide down to E flat, right? And that's all just legato, right? The slide and then the hammer on to pull off. So then we do a downstroke on D flat, upstroke on B, and then end the phrase with a downstroke on C. So the whole phrase one more time. So I'd recommend practicing all of those bebop-derived phrases over backing tracks, over metronome, along to recordings, wherever you can find context to fit any of those ideas in. I'd even go about splitting some of those longer ideas up into smaller ideas so that you can be a little bit more flexible melodically in your improvisations. So to wrap up the masterclass, I've included a blues etude, and this is to work primarily on medium tempo playing, and with regards to right hand technique or picking hand technique, this is to work on free strokes, right? So basically, up tempo playing on guitar and medium tempo or medium up playing on guitar are kind of two separate entities, basically. So with up-tempo playing, it's okay to have like a structured system worked out, like what we've been talking about mostly. But with medium tempo playing, you want a little bit more room for kind of natural improvisation. You want to be able to make up ideas on the spot because you have a little bit more time to stop and kind of hear what you're going to do next, right? With up-tempo playing, it's kind of just like free for all. You're kind of playing a lot of muscle memory stuff, so it's okay to kind of fit in a lot of those licks that you've worked out with this specific picking technique. So with this free stroke kind of approach to medium tempo playing, we're going to be doing a lot of double down strokes, double up strokes, a lot of cross picking, kind of whatever you can do to make things kind of sit in the pocket a little bit better. basically whatever articulation you're hearing in your head, you want your right hand to do whatever it can to make that happen, right? So me personally, I tend to hear a lot of accents on upbeats, right? That's kind of just the way that I like to articulate. So what I've kind of done in turn with my medium tempo playing, for the most part, is I will try to fit in a lot of downstrokes on upbeats, right? Your downward rest strokes are going to have a lot more power and a lot more force into them than your upstrokes are going to have. So they're going to have kind of a natural accent to them, right? So I've kind of taken that and I've used that to mean, if I put downstrokes on upbeats, I'm gonna get these accents happening. So it's not something that I like to be very predictable. I don't want to always have downstrokes on upbeats, because that would just make things feel kind of stiff, I think. So basically just wherever I see fit, I'm kind of throwing in an extra downstroke, and that might mean that I'm playing 2 downstrokes in a row, might mean that I'm playing 3 or 4 downstrokes in a row, just like whatever helps the music swing and keep that forward motion going. And I think you'll get a better idea of this when I just play through the example. So here's the last example of the masterclass. So when we zoomed in on my right hand in that last example, I'm sure you're able to see a lot of things that were kind of contradictory to what I described previously in the masterclass. Like I said, a lot of double down strokes, just kind of whatever helps the music swing a little bit more and whatever helps me get that articulation that I'm hearing in my head. So this, like I mentioned, is an extremely personal thing, and it really is just dictated by what you listen to. So I'd recommend, listening to a wide variety of soloists, kind of figuring out what you like. As far as guitar articulation goes, I tend to listen to Bobby Broom a lot, Grant Green as well, just because these are guitarists that, their articulation really resonates with me, their phrasing really resonates with me. So I've kind of internalized a lot of their phrases, I sing a lot of their phrases just to make sure that they're kind of ingrained in my ear, and then I just kind of connect that stuff to my instrument through this, varied articulation that I described. So I'd really recommend practicing this etude a lot, just getting this to feel like muscle memory, even coming up with your own etudes, making sure you're playing the same thing every time so you can really experiment with your right hand and chase that phrasing that you're, hearing in your head, that articulation that you're hearing. With this etude in particular, I practice this anywhere from 150 beats per minute up to 350 beats per minute. So when I'm practicing it slow, I'm going to be doing a lot of different stuff with my right hand just to make sure that the music swings and make sure that I'm chasing that articulation I hear in my head. When I'm practicing this fast, it's going to be a little bit more uniform and it's going to fit more into that structured system that I described.